Hello, and welcome to Building Equitable and Inclusive Studios with Disabled Employees, or Why It Took Me 18 Years to Land a Job. I am Courtney Craven, and I'm very excited to be speaking at this year's Accessibility Toronto Gaming Conference. You might be wondering who I am. I am the founder of CanIPlayThat.com, and if you're not familiar with our work, we're the largest media outlet devoted entirely to accessibility in video games and tech. And we're also written for and staffed entirely by disabled people. I'm an accessibility and inclusion consultant in both video games and higher education. I am a captioning project manager for Unreal Engine at Epic Games, where I've been a contractor for going on 3 years now. I'm a writer. I have a novel that about 10 whole people have read, and I'm a writing instructor as well. So what am I here to talk to you about today? You may have noticed that video games themselves are becoming more and more accessible and inclusive of disabled people, but we're not seeing that same shift in game jobs in the industry. How do we work to change that so that game jobs are just as inclusive and accessible of disabled people as the games we play are? That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. This is going to be a personal talk for me. I'm going to pull a lot from my own experience as an autistic and chronically ill person working in the games industry, use a lot of my own experience to help make my points, and I hope you enjoy. So the first thing you should know is that you're already working with disabled people. Over 1 billion people throughout the world are disabled, so it's pretty safe to assume that we're already your colleagues. And there are some simple things that you can do right now to make sure that your offices, your studios are inclusive as possible. You can make sure that captions are on for all Zoom meetings, all Teams meetings, things like that. Just default to captions on instead of waiting for people to ask. You can follow accessible document and presentation best practices, and those can be found in a lot of places, but I know Microsoft Office has guidance on that in all of its Office applications. And you can reconsider your beliefs as to what constitutes a good work conversation, and that's something that I'm going to touch on a little bit more later. Now, I'm going to talk to you about some things from my perspective as an autistic and disabled person working in the games industry that you may not have considered play a big role in inclusion and equity in the game studios for disabled people. The first thing I'd like to talk to you about is resumes and recruiting. Appreciate resumes that highlight who the person is instead of just a long list of past successes. Being a neurodivergent job seeker is very hard. I have been trying for a lot of years and I've had minimal success. We put so much effort into trying to mask, trying to fit into that small box of what has been accepted as a professional person, what is accepted as a valid job seeker. And it's easy because of that to get discouraged and feel like we just don't fit within the industry. We don't fit in the company culture. So I would like to present to you what I call a person-first approach to reviewing resumes. Shown on the screen here is my resume that I recently put together, and you'll notice that instead of the work background and work successes laid out chronologically being the focus of the resume, the focus is what's called professional pillars, and those are things that I'm proud of, that I have achieved both in my professional life and in my life as a volunteer doing accessibility advocacy, things that I have had success in, and what makes me who I am as a professional person, what makes me who I am as a person in general. And I've also taken some space here at the bottom to highlight some of my career wins, and those are not typical wins that you would see listed on a resume, specific job-related successes. They're more things that I'm proud of, things that I believe would make me a good addition to any company. And there are career coaches like Jean Leggett that take this sort of approach to resume and career guidance, and it was with her that I created this resume that's shown on the screen. Being able to focus on your talents and passions, instead of all of your past successes is a game changer, because not everybody has a long list of industry wins that we can pull on to sell ourselves for a job. And as I said, I created this resume with Jean, And I'm almost 40 years old, and this is the first resume that I have created that feels like me. It doesn't feel like I'm selling a version of myself that doesn't really exist, a version of myself that's trying to fit within the very restrictive box of what a professional person is. It's something that I'm proud of, something that I'm excited to send off if I'm looking for a job. And the confidence that being able to create this resume with this focus gave me helped end an 18-year dry spell of me not being able to find a job doing anything other than dog walking. And I was able to land multiple lucrative contracts within a couple of weeks because of the confidence that I had in being able to focus on who I am as a person instead of who I'm supposed to be to get a job. A lot of game industry jobs rely on contractors, and that stands to reason because a lot of jobs in the industry are temporary. For example, when you're developing a game, you need more people to work on it than you do post-launch to maintain the game. So it makes sense that a lot of roles are temporary. The problem with that is that contract work is a big risk for disabled people. We give up a lot of our safety net when we take a contract role, but sometimes it's the only option that we have. Many of us need the benefits of full-time employment to be able to work at all. We need things like paid time off, sick days, medical leave, better boundaries, health insurance, and bonuses. And I said I'm going to pull on my experience, so I'm going to do that here. I mentioned that I've been a contractor for 3 years now, and I love my job. I love the people I work with. I'm good at what I do. But it's been almost 3 years without any real kind of break because I am a contractor, and taking a break also means taking a break from getting paid. And when you're chronically ill, when you're disabled, you need a constant flow of income, either from Social Security benefits or from employment income, to make sure that you can always afford your medical needs. So if you can't take that break, you don't get that healthy detachment from your work. You don't get to stop and refresh, reset, step away from the stress of work for a while, and that can often lead to more health problems that you're more prone to if you're already sick or disabled. So rethinking relying on contractors would go a long way in making this a more equitable industry for disabled people. And remote work is something that also needs to be embraced in the industry. Remote work equals accessible work. The COVID-19 pandemic that's been going on for about 2 years now has shown us that remote roles are both feasible and productive. Remote work allows disabled people time to tend to our medical needs, manage pain, decompress in a quiet room, and meet our body's needs in ways we may not feel comfortable doing in an office. For example, I can't really sit for long periods of time because I've had lupus for 35 years and I have severe joint pain. So my workday looks like a lot like the Pomodoro method, with which, if you're not familiar with that, it's working for 25 to 30 minutes, taking a break, coming back to work, taking another break. And during that break, I get up, I walk my dogs, I take a walk around my apartment complex because I need to decompress my spine and get out and move my joints around. Now, if I was to do that in an office every half hour, it would be pretty disruptive and probably would be frowned upon. So being able to be a remote worker, as I have been for the last 3 years, allows me to stay at a minimal pain level instead of trying to push through it, and by the end of the workday, I'm at a pain level that makes everything impossible to do. And there's a bonus of the flexibility of remote work. When we are freed from the stress of trying to meet our body's needs as best we can in an office, we free up that thinking space to be more innovative than we would be otherwise. Networking is also a big barrier for a lot of people in the professional setting. So when networking, as a person in a position of power, you need to look at who you are giving your time to and who is in your network. Because a lot of times in games, in any industry really, but especially in games, getting a job comes down to knowing the right people, being connected to the right people, talking to the right people. And some of us are just not good at making those connections naturally. So you need to re-examine who you're connected to. Ask yourself questions like, does everyone you give your attention to, does everyone that has space on your calendar look like you? Have they had similar paths into the industry? Is their experience of simply existing in video game spaces similar to yours? Can they exist online safely without toxicity, without harassment, without all of the things that so many marginalized people deal with? And once you have a clear picture of who isn't getting your time, you can then begin to more equitably allot your time, making for a more diverse network for you. And speaking of networking, when you are networking, when you have more equitably allotted your time, you need to make sure that you're networking accessibly as well. There are millions of ways to network in the games industry, from social media to things like game industry gatherings, clubhouse chats, Twitter chats, things like that. And there's something that a lot of those things have in common too. They're not very accessible a lot of the time. Have you ever heard the saying, if you have to ask how much it is, you can't afford it? The same is true of accessibility. If you have to ask if an event or an opportunity is accessible to you, chances are it's not. So you need to make sure that you're doing the work to ensure that all of your networking events, all of the opportunities that you present to people are accessible to everyone. And I said I'd come back to what good communication is. And this is a big barrier for a lot of people, myself included. I am not naturally the most good communicator. So I want you to think about a work conversation that you came away from feeling like it was a good talk. It was productive, you felt listened to, and your needs for that exchange were met. Was it in person? Was it face-to-face? Was it a vocal conversation? Probably. Have you ever had one of those good talks via email or chat app like Slack? If not, you probably have a preference for vocal or face-to-face communication. The problem with that is a lot of people, such as myself, are really not natural face-to-face communicators. For example, if you talk to me online, on Twitter or something, or via email, you're going to get so much more of my personality, and I'm going to feel so much more comfortable opening up and talking that you'll have a much better picture of who I am versus if we met in person and I was trying to figure out how to navigate a vocal conversation, because reading social cues as you have to for face-to-face conversations is not something that comes naturally to me. It's not something that comes naturally to a lot of autistic and neurodiverse people. And as a people, not even just as an industry, as people, we tend to have a preference for vocal and face-to-face communication, and we want to get away from text and email because we view it as impersonal. So I just want to call out that we need to make sure that we're giving text-based communication equal value to vocal and face-to-face communication. Speaking of communication, meetings. We can't talk about communication at work without talking about meetings, right? Meetings are a great place to get a good picture of your company culture. Who feels safe speaking up? Who doesn't feel welcome in spaces at your workplace? Spend some time in meetings, and you can do this both in-person meetings and on Zoom meetings, things like that. Spend some time looking at who's talking the most compared to who doesn't speak up at all. And if you look at this over a course of several meetings, you might start to notice a pattern. Are people allowed to freely speak up with their ideas and chime in when they have something to say during meetings? And if so, are the same people over and over again chiming in versus the same people who may sit there on Zoom looking like they have something to say, which is my constant face in Zoom meetings, but not actually ever saying it? That is because some of us are really not good at reading the social cues of knowing when we can chime in, when it's our turn to speak. In my life, there has not ever been a meeting that I have been expected to speak in that I have successfully spoken up at the correct time. I inevitably interrupt someone because the way my brain works, I can get so distracted thinking about my own ideas that while I am listening to the other person, I'm also getting more and more anxious, wondering, okay, when am I supposed to talk? When do I get to say the thing? Because I don't read those social cues naturally. The pauses in speech, the subtle shifts in people's faces that indicate that they're almost done speaking. So I will either risk being rude and interrupting someone, and that's never intentional. That's never my intent to interrupt someone because I think I have something more important to say. It's just a failure on my part of successfully reading those social cues. Or I will sit there and not say anything at all. And it's usually that because the last thing I want to do is be considered a rude colleague. So we need to provide ways for meeting attendees without putting us on the spot to make sure that we have equal airtime, so to speak, to make sure that our ideas are being heard. And you can do this in a number of ways. One of them being using the raised hand feature in Zoom or any feature like that on a meeting app. And you can do it by paying attention to text, giving equal value to text chat during a meeting as you give to people speaking up vocally. And we also need to consider flexibility in processes and time, which probably seems like a weird thing because, yes, there are a lot of processes that are kind of rigid. There are ways things need to be done, especially in video games. There's a way you do things. My point here, though, is be open to alternative ways of individuals getting things done. Because what may work for you, what may work for a manager or a team lead, may leave other team members feeling like they're failing or at least not performing at their best. For example, in my job, I am a project manager for captions, which means I do captioning and I do project management stuff. When I'm focused on those captions, if I get interruptions, the way that my brain works, there is not a chance that I'm going to be able to shift focus to that interruption to tend to my project management responsibilities and then come back and successfully do my captions with the same level of attention and detail that I was using before. Because I don't multitask that well, and a lot of people don't multitask that well. All of these experiences that I'm mentioning from my own experience are not unique to me. So I work in a way that I do this job from one time to another time, and then I shift focus to the second part of my job. Whereas it's often suggested to me, oh, well, just jump on this. And that's, if you want quality work from me, that is not how it has to be done. And we also need to allow for flexible work times as well. A lot of people work better at certain times of the day. Myself, for example, because I am so prone to being completely thrown off by interruptions and distractions, I work best from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. before anybody else gets into the office, logs on to Slack, anything like that. So while there are times that people need to be working all at the same time for meeting, for all hands on deck situations, also be flexible in allowing people time to work when they can really shine, even if it's at strange hours. And the last point I want to make is one that was really hard for me to learn as the leader of Can I Play That? Don't wait for disabled applicants to come to you. If you have been shut out over and over and over again, and it's been made clear that your accommodations are a burden, are you going to keep shooting your shot and risking rejection? Probably not. So it may be easy to think, if you're not having a lot of disabled applicants for roles that you open up, that disabled people just aren't interested, and I promise that that is not the case. It often comes down to a matter of not feeling welcome. So if you want to recruit disabled employees, you have to actively do so. And I will tell you how I learned this the hard way. Can I Play That launched about 3 years ago, and during the first half of those 3 years, I had assembled a staff that ended up being entirely white people. And that was not my intention. It was just, I had kind of sat back and was waiting for people that wanted to do the jobs to come to me, to ask me if they could do this role at my organization. And I didn't know that there was anything wrong with that. It wasn't until A, I read a book, The Person You Mean to Be, How Good People Fight Bias by Dolly Chugh. And B, I was called out on Can I Play That being staffed entirely by white people, that I realized I need to actively seek out disabled people of color to write for my site if I want to include a diverse cast of voices, if you will. People of color were not submitting to Can I Play That because the way that my staff had assembled, being all white people, we didn't look like the most welcoming space for people of color. So it was my responsibility to stop doing what I had been doing and go seek out those voices that I wanted represented on my site. And the same is true for disabled job seekers. If you want disabled people at your company, you can't wait for them to come to you, because it is highly possible that they simply do not feel welcome at a company where they may have been rejected by the industry over and over and over again. I'm going to leave you with my hopes for the industry. And that is, it's time to go all in on accessibility. And doing this is a great way to create jobs for disabled people in the games industry, because who better to create for our needs than us, right? So we've been relying on accessibility project managers to help make games accessible for a few years now. And they're doing an exceptional job. I know a lot of them. They're wonderful at their jobs, and they have helped produce some incredible, accessible games. But it's time to move beyond that and allow for accessibility specializations in the games industry. And yes, that will be a big investment for a lot of studios, but it will yield even bigger returns, because the more people that can play the games that you are creating, the more money you will earn from those games. So I have, lastly, for you some jobs that I just dreamed up for my accessibility specializations in the games industry. A few of them are captions producer. That would be me. They would ensure that games meet captioning guidelines for readability and usefulness as laid out for television and movies. Because there are guidelines, if you don't know, there are guidelines to make sure that captions are serving the purpose of captions. And while video game captions are getting better, they're still not meeting those guidelines. So a captions producer would make sure that developers and teams are meeting those guidelines and help the team achieve that. The blind experience designer, creating the gameplay mechanics needed to make games fully playable to blind players. Because that is somewhere that we are consistently failing as an industry. I can count on one hand the amount of games that I know of that are fully playable for totally blind people. So the blind experience designer would be working on making games fully playable for totally blind people. And imagine the market that would open up if blind people just knew, yes, I can play this game. Accessible tools developer. This is an important one. This one would work on the engine side of things to ensure game engines are accessible to disabled people, because we're not ever going to have an inclusive industry if the engines needed to make games can't be used by disabled people. And lastly, disability community manager. This is your general wonderful social media community manager person, but they also have the added responsibility of making sure that all of your social media content, all of your community content is accessible to your entire audience of players. And that's all I have for you today. I want to thank you for your time, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to chat, happy to elaborate further on anything I've presented here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.